throughout these victim impact statements, a lot of the emotions that a lot of people would have been feeling were said out loud. Things that, as I mentioned, we didn't hear from the witness box because there's a lot of restraint that needs to be held there when somebody is innocent until proven guilty. Now, this is an opportunity for this family who clearly believe that Erin Patterson committed these crimes to say exactly the way that they had impacted them.
I'm Claire Harvey from The Australian, and I'm joined by Ellie Dudley, who's our legal affairs correspondent. Ellie, we've both watched Erin Patterson's sentence hearing in the Victorian Supreme Court. I was intrigued to find out what she's got in her cell.
Yeah, there were a few things that were listed today as to what Erin Patterson is keeping in her cell at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre in northwest Melbourne. She's got a hair straightener, she's got books, she's got pillows. We heard that she's a very keen crocheter. So not only does she have lots of wool and crochet needles for her crocheting, but she's also got blankets that she's crocheted for herself. So it was a very interesting insight into what Erin Patterson's life in prison is like today.
But she's not happy with the conditions. She's concerned that she doesn't get access to the library, she's not allowed to the leisure centre, she's essentially locked in her cell for 22 hours a day. This prison is troubled. It's constantly in the news in Victoria because there are lockdowns thanks to staff shortages, and it houses some of Victoria's most dangerous prisoners, one of whom sounds like is Erin Patterson's next door neighbour.
So we heard as part of this plea hearing that Erin Patterson has been moved between multiple different units, but has spent the majority of time in a unit called the Gordon unit, where she's allowed access to a tiny courtyard out the back of her cell. It's a courtyard that's 1.5 metres by 2 metres by 1.5 metres or something like that. And as you mentioned, she's allowed to socialise with another inmate. And what we heard about this inmate is they're convicted for terrorism offences. They've been in the Gordon unit for a few years, and they've also gotten in trouble before for attacking another inmate. So Erin Patterson's lawyer today spoke about how while Erin is allowed to socialise with this other inmate through a mesh wall that separates their two courtyards, she hasn't.
She also would be allowed to communicate with another prisoner if she can think of one to ask to have intercom privileges with. But her lawyers told the court that she doesn't know the names of any of the other inmates, presumably apart from the terrorist next door. And so she hasn't made that request.
Yeah, she hasn't made that request. She's been making requests to go to the library. But again, due to some of those shortages and due to challenges with the guards, she hasn't been able to be taken as frequently as she would have liked. And all of these arguments about the conditions that she's been kept in the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre form part of an argument from her legal team that it should be taken into account when it comes to sentencing, that because she's been held in such challenging conditions, that's something that the judge should think about when handing down her sentence.
These are typical arguments made at sentencing hearings where lawyers for the convicted person try to mitigate the sentence, basically. There's often talk of a difficult life, prior offending perhaps, being a victim of prior offending. In this instance, Erin Patterson only has one drink driving conviction, so that's not really relevant. We haven't heard verbally any suggestion that she had a difficult childhood, for example, but there are written submissions by her lawyer, Colin Mandy, that haven't been read to the court. Why else do the lawyers say Erin Patterson should get a shorter time in prison?
They've sort of put themselves in a little bit of a challenging position here, right? Because she can't show any remorse because she maintains her innocence. So she can't come out and say, I'm so sorry, these are the reasons that I did it, and these are all the challenges that I've had, because she still maintains that she never did it. So they're relying on things like autism and Asperger's syndrome, which they say that she has, and they say that there is documented evidence of that in conversations that police had with other witnesses, and in conversations that they had with Simon Patterson as well, who said that she displays symptoms of autism. So it's things like that. Also, obviously, the circumstances that she's been held in prison should enable her to have a shorter sentence as well. Things like that the defence are drawing on to say she shouldn't be in prison for as long as the prosecution think that she should be.
Justice Christopher Beale has quite a lot of discretion. The maximum sentence for murder in Victoria is life. There's a standard sentence of 25 years if you murder a civilian. It's longer if you murder an emergency services worker or a police officer. Did we get any indications about which way Justice Beale might be going?
It's sort of a bit of this and a little bit of that. At the end, he said that the crimes were horrendous. He agreed with the prosecution when the prosecution was talking about how cruel and callous these crimes were, how they were premeditated, they were egregious, they were well planned. And so he said, yes, I agree with you, these crimes were horrendous. That being said, though, he really seemed to take into consideration the circumstances in which Erin Patterson has been held in detention. And he seems to have a little bit of a bleeding heart and take into consideration some of the ways that Erin Patterson has been treated. So it really could go either way.
In the morning, we heard very moving victim impact statements from several people, including Ian Wilkinson, the husband of Heather Wilkinson, who died at that lunch. Ian Wilkinson was, of course, the only survivor, and from Simon Patterson, Erin Patterson's husband. I found Ian Wilkinson's statement in particular very, very sad.
It was a really challenging listen. You know, it was challenging. I was listening to it from my desk and listening to the way that he spoke about how much he loved his wife, the way that he spoke about how these crimes have impacted him. He said that he was suddenly single. He said that he no longer had somebody to debrief about his day at the end of the day. And, he no longer took joy in pottering around the kitchen and pottering around the garden because the silence that she had left was deafening. The other interesting part about Ian Wilkinson's victim impact statement is the forgiveness that he gave Erin. He said that Erin has now become a victim of his kindness because he's chosen to forgive her, and that he hopes that she will spend her time in prison thinking about how to become a better person. So yeah, it was a really challenging listen, and it was a bit more unfiltered. When Ian Wilkinson, we've heard from him before, we heard from him when he was a witness in the case, but he was obviously being questioned by the prosecutors and by the defence, and he could only answer their questions, whereas these were his words and drawing on those real emotions that he's felt as a result of Erin's actions.
We heard from Don Patterson's 100-year-old mother, Martha. Her statement was read by another family member. But what a tragedy to be dealing at the age of 100 with the death of your son, of his wife, and other family members.
Yeah, and that was something that Justice Beale drew on at the end of today's hearing as well. He spoke about how this crime has impacted 4 generations. He spoke about often these things are characterised as a ripple effect, but he said this is more like a tsunami. There are 4 generations of people who have been deeply impacted by Erin Patterson's cruel offending, and that's obviously something he's going to take into account when it comes to her sentencing. With Simon Patterson, he didn't read out his victim impact statement in court. Why do you think that's something he may have chosen not to do?
Yeah, it was read by a cousin. Perhaps he thought he couldn't hold it together emotionally during that reading. I thought his statement was interesting. Simon Patterson has, throughout this process been extremely dignified. When he was giving evidence against his wife, of course, he wasn't allowed to mention his belief that she had tried to poison him on multiple occasions before she successfully poisoned his family. In the witness box during the trial, he spoke about her as a highly intelligent woman and someone who he still loved and had loved very deeply. I thought that at this time, the victim impact statement time, we might see what Simon really thought. Erin tried to kill me. Erin was an abusive partner. There was kind of none of that. He was very bitter about the media's interest in his life and seemed very angry that their life had been interrupted by people trying to get them to talk, which must have been very difficult. But there were glimmers of joy as well, weren't there? He said that he and the children, had been very grateful for the love that they'd been shown.
He did focus quite heavily on those children. He spoke about how, as a family, the 3 of them, they're adjusting to living in a home with a solo parent. These children are adjusting to trying to understand who their mother is and knowing that their mother killed their grandparents, and that's something that everyone in their entire community knows. But as you said, he described his children as very strong and said that they're hurdles that they're getting together as a family and are well supported in doing so.
I thought there was a real mic drop moment when Ruth Dubois, who is the daughter of Heather and Ian Wilkinson, made her statement. And she said, as a mother, you try to protect your children from anything bad that might happen in this world. And she feels that she has failed in this instance because she hasn't been able to shield her kids from the notoriety that the whole family has now got. And she ended her victim impact statement by addressing Erin Patterson directly, saying, I cannot believe that as a mother you have chosen to expose your children to this. It was... I was glad to hear that, someone talking to her directly.
And I think that throughout these victim impact statements, a lot of the emotions that a lot of people would have been feeling were said out loud. Things that, as I mentioned, we didn't hear from the witness box because there's a lot of restraint that needs to be held there when somebody is innocent until proven guilty. Now, this is an opportunity for this family who clearly believe that Erin Patterson committed these crimes to say exactly the way that they had impacted them.
There was a remarkable photograph taken before the hearing began of Erin Patterson being unloaded from a prison van out the back of the court complex in Melbourne. It was taken by Jason Edwards, who's a photographer for the News Corp Australia Newswire. An amazing image. Jason was obviously high up in a building near the back of the court, and gazumped all the other photographers who were somewhere else altogether. He did an incredible job. Those photos were remarkable, weren't they? At one moment, she was looking up to the sky as if she hadn't seen it for a while.
Yeah, looking up to the sky, they looked almost biblical. They were such fascinating images, and that the first time that we've seen her since she was locked away in a prison van and sent off after she was convicted of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Even then, the photos that were able to be released then, many of our readers will know, were photos of her in the back of a prison van that were taken weeks before she was convicted. So this is the first time in a very long time that people have seen Erin Patterson. She looked like she'd perhaps lost a little bit of weight. She didn't look fantastic. She looked deeply challenged. But yeah, it was great to be able to see her on her way into court this morning.
She'll be back in court on September the 8th at 9:30am. Ellie, you'll be covering it live. Have you got a tip for what that sentence might be?
I wouldn't be foolish enough to even guess, Claire.
I'll talk to you then.